Okay, class, let's begin part 2. So, part 2 of today's lecture on cognitive ability testing focuses on evidence for validity. Make sure that you have already finished watching part 1 before you watch part 2. So, in part 2, we go through evidence for predictive validity, which is to say, does general mental ability predict outcomes that matter? We also compare how general mental ability fares in comparison to other selection tools, and also what happens when we use general mental ability in conjunction with these other tools. We compare how general mental ability fares compared to work experience. So which matters more, getting someone smart or getting someone experienced, and so on. And lastly, most research on looking at this has focused on task performance as the criterion. So what about or training performance as well? But what about other criteria, class? We talk about other criteria as well. So class, I'm not going to bury the lead. Here is the spoiler front and center. Cognitive ability tests are, without a doubt, the most valid selection instruments we have. So here are some validity coefficients for you. Let's quickly review how to interpret validity coefficients. Once again, class, these are Pearson R correlation coefficients, which you'd know from basic statistics. Now, we know that positive correlations mean that the two things gel together. Negative correlations means negative correlation would mean that they move apart. The closer the correlation is to a positive one, the stronger the positive relation is. Yeah? So here we see that for high complexity jobs, general mental ability has a correlation of roughly 0.58 with performance. And now another thing you can kind of work out, class, is if you square the correlation, you can get a crude index of how much variance in the criterion is being predicted. So 0.5 squared, class, is 25%. So what we see here is that for medium complexity jobs, general mental ability predicts job performance roughly 25% of the variance in job performance. Now that's a pretty big deal when you express that 25% in dollars generated for the firm. So let's look at some patterns, class. We see that high complexity jobs have a higher validity coefficient than medium and low complexity jobs, in that order. The less complex the job, the less likely it is to benefit from general mental ability. Yeah, because complex jobs require a lot of thinking on the fly and a lot of judgment and decision making, which is where general mental ability can shine, and also where it involves a broad range of cognitive skill sets. Now, it also predicts training success in military settings and in civilian settings. General mental ability, to a lesser extent, predicts objective leader effectiveness. So we have a correlation of just over 0.3. So if you square that, that's roughly 9%, which doesn't seem like much, but is higher than a lot of other things predicting leader effectiveness. And for creativity, it's roughly 0.35. So again, we see general mental ability showing predictive validity for all these outcomes. So here we have more results from a large-scale validation study. We see that for core technical proficiency, the validity coefficients from various cognitive ability tests, including general cognitive ability, are pretty high, close to 0.1. They're getting pretty high up there. Other things like personality, vocational interest, job reward preference, not so much. We see much lower validity coefficients here, class. Now, in this figure, we see how the validity of general mental ability generalizes across jobs. So we see that general mental ability relates pretty nicely to performance in a broad range of jobs like manager, clerical work, sales, protective professions, even car drivers, people working in the trades, and so on. We do, however, see this general pattern that high complexity jobs see a stronger relationship between general mental ability and performance, less so for low complexity jobs. Now class, let's see how the validity of general mental ability stacks up vis-a-vis other selection tools. So as you can see here, the general mental ability is only trumped ever so slightly by the work sample. Now the work sample is literally doing the job. So it's a hands-on simulation of the work being done. Now, the thing with work samples class is that you can only use work samples to hire people who've done the job before. If you're hiring someone for entry-level work, they would not be able to produce a work sample, just by definition. Yeah, so the usefulness of work samples is not as high as, say, general mental ability. Then we have integrity, personality with far lower validity coefficients than mental ability. Then there is a training and experience. So this class, it roughly refers to responses to selection criteria. So we have the selection criteria, and you respond by describing how your training and experience relates to what's in the selection criteria. That has a pretty good validity coefficient. Not as much as general mental ability, but again, this requires actual experience. And so for people who are new to the job, who are new hires and who have no experience, you wouldn't be able to figure out whether they'd have the potential to perform well based on this. Right? And everything else has far lower validity coefficients. Now the cool thing is, class, that if you combine these tests with general mental ability, look here in the second column, you get some pretty solid validity coefficients, particularly for testing people's integrity and general mental ability. You get a very solid 0.65 validity coefficient. For work samples and mental ability, you get a pretty good one too. And for all of these are all quite nice. What that means, class, is that general mental ability is not meant to stand alone. It's meant to be used in conjunction with other selection tests that, in combination with general mental ability, provide a gain or boost to the validity of the selection package and of general mental ability. Yeah? Okay. Let's continue. Now let's see how general mental ability relates to on-the-job experience. On the x-axis, class, we have the years of experience a worker has, and on the y-axis we have the validity coefficient, which is again the extent to which the predictor relates to the criterion, which is performance. Now observe, class, that for the red balls, general mental ability has a pretty solid validity coefficient to start with that only gets higher with experience. This is once again quite counterintuitive. How well you perform, or rather the extent to which general mental ability predicts your performance is stronger when you've been on the job longer. When you've been on the job longer, you've learned a lot of what you need to do the job, and so that's where really just being smarter lets you shine all the more. Interestingly, job experience matters less and less for people who are on the job longer. Yeah, so the payoff for hiring someone experienced really levels off and vanishes pretty quickly vis-a-vis hiring someone with general mental ability. A high level of that, I should clarify. So, quick summary, class. Of course, we must refer to thorough job analyses to pinpoint which criteria are relevant for the job. But generally, we see that general mental ability is pretty valid. It's also valid for selecting frontline supervisors. and it is more valid for more complex jobs, which is to say, the more stuff in the job analysis, the greater the variety of tasks, the more likely general mental ability is to have good, high validity. Predictive validity, I should say. And from a practical predictive view, like I mentioned earlier, specific cognitive abilities don't actually provide greater validity than just measuring just measuring general mental ability. Now, there are still good reasons to measure specific cognitive skills, often for reasons of utility or to make the whole selection package seem more fair, and we'll get to that in a bit, class. Now, here we compare the predictive validity of selection tools with how popular they are. Notice, class, how disproportionately popular interviews and references are compared to how low the validity is, especially for references. Fortunately, we do see ability tests in a lot of professional selection packages, selection processes, which reflects their pretty good level of validity as documented in the evidence. Now, class, what about other criteria? What about counterproductive work behavior? Does general mental ability predict whether people break the rules at work? And what about organizational citizenship behaviors? Does general mental ability predict helping? Now, interestingly, for helping or going the extra mile, which is what organizational citizenship behaviors are, it has a pretty modest correlation with general mental ability, 0.23. So it's there, but it's not very strong. Now again, you can square 0.23 and get roughly 4%, which is not really much to write home about, yeah? So it doesn't predict OCBs as much. For counterproductive work behavior, the true score correlation seems to be 0, which is that smart people are neither more nor less likely to commit counterproductive work behaviors. So if you care a lot about these criteria for whatever reason, then of course you want to use more than just general mental ability in testing. So for example, class, in customer service, OCBs matter a lot. That's going the extra mile in service. We know from decades of research on customer service that customer satisfaction really depends on the extent to which service workers delight the customer by going the extra mile. And of course, in many service settings, in many retail settings, theft is a major concern, the loss of merchandise. Now, you would need more than just general mental ability to predict that. Okay, now, class, here we go into slightly more detail. I won't linger here, but you can basically get the sense of roughly how much of the variance in each of these criteria are predicted by various predictors, including general mental ability and personality. As you can see, general mental ability really shines with regard to task performance, less so for the other criteria. And we see here how general mental ability relates to other things like personality and career interests. It predicts just about all these other things, but for some things like, for example, willingness to stay in the firm, continuance intentions, personality might matter more. So once again, class, you have to consider the criteria of interest, which of course is informed by job analysis. Yeah, and so that is it for predictive validity. Let's move on to the next bit. Take a break if you like. There's a guided meditation video right below this. It's one of my favorites called the Mountain Meditation. Feel free to use it if you like. Nice little break between these videos. And then scroll down to the final video of this lecture.